In July of 1947, Life magazine published a photograph that would define America's idea of the outlaw biker for the next 70 years. A drunk man on a Harley in Hollister, California. Beer bottles piled around him like a trash-covered throne. The caption screamed about 4,000 motorcyclists who had roared into Hollister and tired of ordinary thrills. It became the single most influential photograph in motorcycle history. The image that launched 1,000 biker movies and helped shape the mythology Marlon Brando would later channel in The Wild One. There's just one problem. According to the most credible later accounts, the photograph was staged. The drunk wasn't part of any riot. He was Eddie Davenport of Tulare, a writer who ended up being the face of the whole story. A bystander named Gus DeZerpa watched the shoot and went on record decades later saying he saw the photographer and an assistant gather the bottles into a pile, position the bike, and put Davenport into the frame. DeZerpa tried to photobomb it in protest. You can see him in the original negative before the editors cropped him out. And the Hells Angels, the gang Americans would come to fear more than the Mafia? They didn't even exist yet, not for another 9 months. But that photograph would do more than sell magazines. It would birth a myth so powerful the real men who stepped into it couldn't resist it. By 1965, the California Attorney General would declare war on them. By 1969, they would be at the center of a killing in front of 300,000 witnesses and the Rolling Stones. By 1979, the United States government would deploy the same law used to crush the Italian Mafia, assign the future director of the FBI to prosecute them, and still fail to bring Sonny Barger down. This is the story of how a group of restless young men turned a famously arranged photograph into one of the very few motorcycle clubs to force governments on multiple continents into passing gang-specific laws. How they built a legend so durable that most of what you think you know about them is wrong, and how somehow through all of it, they're still here. To understand the Hells Angels, you first have to understand what happened in America after victory over Japan Day. Millions of young American men came home from the most intense war in human history. Paratroopers who had jumped into Normandy in the dark. Bomber gunners who had survived 15 missions when the statistics said they should have died on 6. Marines who had watched their friends die taking islands nobody in San Francisco had ever heard of. And what did America offer them? A factory job, a suburban ranch house, a wife, a lawn, and a weekly bowling league. For a lot of these guys, it was like asking a wolf to work retail, so they went looking for the adrenaline they had been weaned on overseas, and they found it on the cheap. Harley-Davidson had built more than 90,000 military WLA motorcycles for the war, and after the Japanese surrender, Uncle Sam needed to unload them fast. Southern California was flooded with surplus Harleys going for pocket change. Enter the motorcycle club. The first one that matters to our story was called the Pissed Off Bastards of Bloomington, POBOB. Yes, that's the actual name. Welcome to post-war California. They formed in 1945 in the unincorporated town of Bloomington, right next door to Fontana and San Bernardino. The early club drew heavily from the Inland Empire's post-war, working-class world, returning veterans, young men from Dust Bowl migrant families, and locals who wanted something rougher than factory life. And this is where basically every other YouTube documentary about the Hells Angels gets the story wrong. Most of them will point to Otto Friedli and blur two different stories together. Friedli really is credited as a founder of the 1948 Hells Angels in Fontana. But a lot of retellings slot him in as a pissed-off bastard founder back in 1945, which runs into an obvious chronology problem. Otto Friedli was born in June 1931. In 1945, he was 14 years old. Before he died in 2008, Friedli himself went on the record saying he did not join the earlier motorcycle club scene until around 1950. The internet mashes the two stories into one. The real story is weirder and more specific. Here's the thing about these early clubs. They were not criminal organizations, not yet. They were drinking clubs for young men with too much combat history or not enough of it, and nowhere to channel the energy. They raced Harleys through the Mojave Desert. They punched each other. They showed up to American Motorcyclist Association rallies, got drunk, and caused property damage the local papers would inflate into stories about Attila the Hun invading Modesto. Then came the 4th of July weekend of 1947, Hollister, California, and the single most influential weekend in motorcycle history. The Hollister rally was not a Hells Angels event. The Hells Angels did not exist. It was an AMA-sanctioned rally called the Gypsy Tour. The population of Hollister at the time was around 4,500. Somewhere between roughly 2,000 and 4,000 people showed up that weekend, with actual riders coming in lower than the most sensational headlines implied. What actually happened? Approximately 50 arrests, almost all misdemeanors, public drunkenness, reckless driving, and disturbing the peace. The street sweepers hauled away half a ton of broken beer bottles on Monday morning. The local chief of police told the San Francisco Chronicle that it was just one hell of a mess. There is no widely cited evidence that Hollister residents were seriously injured by the bikers. A city councilman praised them, saying these trick riders had done more harm to themselves than to the town. But that was not the story Life magazine was about to tell. On July 21, 1947, Life ran the photograph on page 31. The photographer was Barney Peterson. The man on the bike was Eddie Davenport. Gus DeZerpa's later account, given to motorcycle historian Jerry Smith in 1997, is the version most historians treat as credible. DeZerpa said he watched Peterson and an assistant arrange the scene, pull Davenport out of Johnny's bar, put him on a borrowed bike, and take the shot. DeZerpa told his wife that night that it was not right and that they should not be doing that. The Life caption described 4,000 motorcyclists who had quickly tired of ordinary thrills and turned to more exciting stunts. America believed every word. And now here is the kicker. The American Motorcyclist Association allegedly responded to the panic by issuing a statement that 99% of motorcyclists are law-abiding and that the other 1% are outlaws giving everyone else a bad name. Except the AMA has never been able to find any original statement showing they ever said it. In 2005, the AMA's own public information director, Tom Lindsay, went on record with a researcher and flat out admitted the quote is apocryphal. He said that it is apocryphal. The entire identity of the outlaw biker world, the 1%er diamond patch, the whole iconography of American motorcycle rebellion, is built on a quote the AMA has no record of ever issuing. A myth, on top of a famously arranged photograph of a riot that was not really a riot. Congratulations, you are now smarter than about 99% of the History Channel. But the men who would become the Hells Angels did not care whether the AMA actually said it. They heard it, they claimed it. And on March 17, 1948, St. Patrick's Day, in the rough part of Fontana, California, a town the bikers called Felony Flats, Otto Friedli and a group of riders started using the name Hells Angels. Friedli is generally credited with leading the formation of that first chapter. And the question nobody ever answers properly is this: where did the name come from? According to long-standing club lore, confirmed by Sonny Barger's 2000 autobiography, the name came through a guy named Arvid Olsen and wartime aviation culture. Olsen had flown with the Flying Tigers during World War II in the 3rd Pursuit Squadron, which was nicknamed Hells Angels. Olsen was not a founding member, but he was friends with the guys in Fontana, and he suggested the name. The name itself had been bouncing around military and popular culture for years before Olsen brought it to the bikers. The 303rd Bombardment Group had a famous B-17 nicknamed Hells Angels, and the original source everyone was drawing on was Howard Hughes's 1930 silent film Hells Angels, about World War I pilots. Aviators named their planes and squadrons after it for the next 15 years. So when you trace it through the lore, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club is named after a fighter squadron, drawing on a bomber tradition rooted in a Howard Hughes silent film about a different war entirely. Welcome to America. The club's iconic logo, the grinning winged skull in a leather aviator's cap called the Death's Head, was refined in 1954 by a tattoo artist known only as Sundown. A 2019 Australian federal court case against Redbubble for selling bootleg merchandise surfaced documentary evidence around the 1954 membership card design and the Sundown attribution. In 1959, a young man named Sonny Barger commissioned a redesigned, larger version the club called the Barger Larger. Every Hells Angel has worn some version of that design since. And that brings us to Sonny Barger himself. Ralph Hubert Barger Jr. was born October 8, 1938, in Modesto, California. His mother left when he was 4 months old. He was raised by a Pentecostal grandmother and an alcoholic dock worker father in Oakland. He dropped out of school at 16. He lied about his age and enlisted in the Army, but he was kicked out 14 months later when they discovered he was underage. On April 1, 1957, at 18, Sonny Barger and his friend Don Reeves encountered a biker wearing a death's head patch from a dormant Sacramento chapter. They had never heard of the club, but they liked the patch. They had it copied at a Hayward trophy shop and founded their own chapter in Oakland. Then they found out the real Hells Angels already existed, and Sonny Barger, all of 19 years old, decided he was going to run the whole thing. Between 1957 and 1964, Barger worked to consolidate the scattered chapters under one structure, with the same bylaws and the same rules. He established a 50-mile territorial buffer between chapters. No spiking the club beer with LSD, no throwing live ammunition into the campfire, no messing with another member's wife. When the original Burdu chapter faced leadership changes and legal pressure around 1958, Barger helped shift the center of gravity from San Bernardino to Oakland. Oakland remains the chapter most identified with that role today. In 1966, the Hells Angels quietly incorporated as a nonprofit. They copyrighted their name. They began aggressively defending the Death's Head trademark in court. Remember that, because it is going to matter in about 12 minutes. But first, they had to survive 1965. That was the year the Hells Angels stopped being a California subculture and became a national phenomenon. It started with two teenage girls. On Labor Day weekend 1964, at a rally in Monterey, two young women, 14 and 15, reported they had been gang raped by approximately 20 Hells Angels. The charges made national headlines. On September 25, 1964, the Monterey District Attorney dropped them. Later accounts describe the evidentiary case falling apart, with one complainant unwilling to testify. But California Attorney General Thomas Lynch decided not to let it go. He spent the next 6 months compiling a statewide report. On March 15, 1965, Lynch released what became known as the Lynch Report. He alleged approximately 450 Hells Angels members statewide, 874 felony arrests, and 300 felony convictions. He complained in a Time magazine interview that the Angels seemed badly in need of baths. The Lynch Report was meant as a warning. Instead, it became an advertisement. Time magazine profiled them. Newsweek put them on the cover. The New York Times ran a feature. On November 20th, 1965, the Saturday Evening Post ran a massive cover story. One of the reporters who saw the media explosion from the inside was a 30-year-old freelance journalist named Hunter S. Thompson. In May of 1965, Thompson wrote a piece for The Nation titled "The Motorcycle Gangs: Losers and Outsiders." A publisher offered him a book deal on the spot. Thompson spent the next year embedded with the San Francisco and Oakland chapters, drinking with them, riding with them, and eventually getting badly beaten by them. While Thompson was riding with the Angels were discovering LSD. On August 7, 1965, novelist Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, threw a party at his ranch in La Honda, California. His psychedelic crew, the Merry Pranksters, hung a 15-foot banner that read, "The Merry Pranksters welcome the Hells Angels." Police parked their cruisers across the road and did absolutely nothing. Allen Ginsberg, the most famous poet in America, chanted Hare Krishna. Neil Cassidy, the real-life inspiration for Jack Kerouac's On the Road, hung out cracking jokes. And LSD was passed around freely enough that, for many of the Angels, it was their first encounter with acid. Thompson later wrote that once they accepted LSD as a righteous thing, they handled it with the same mindless zeal they bring to their other pleasures. But the Angels did something nobody from either world saw coming. On October 16, 1965, 16 Hells Angels attacked a Vietnam Day Committee Peace March on Adeline Street in Berkeley. They broke through police lines shouting out loud, "America First." Violence broke out, police were assaulted, and 6 Hells Angels were arrested. A month later, on November 19, 1965, in front of Care On TV cameras, Sonny Barger held a press conference. He announced the Hells Angels would not counter-protest the peace movement again. Then he read aloud a telegram he had personally sent to the President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson. The telegram said, "On behalf of myself and my associates, I volunteer a group of loyal Americans for behind-the-lines duty in Vietnam. We feel that a crack group of trained guerrillas will demoralize the Viet Cong and advance the cause of freedom." Yeah. The Hells Angels formally volunteered themselves for behind-the-lines duty in Vietnam. President Johnson declined. If you're enjoying this, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. We cover motorcycle history, organized crime, and the stories nobody tells right every week. Now, back to it. Because things are about to get genuinely dark. By 1969, the Hells Angels were no longer a secret. They were on magazine covers. They'd been mythologized by Hunter Thompson's book, published in 1967, to massive acclaim, which is impressive considering that the Angels ended Thompson's reporting on Labor Day 1966 with a brutal beating in front of a bonfire at Bass Lake. Thompson later told journalist Studs Terkel, "My face looked like it had been jammed into the spokes of a speeding Harley, and the only thing keeping me awake was the spastic pain of a broken rib." Thompson later said the immediate trigger was that he had criticized one angel for beating his wife and his dog. Anyway, on December 6, 1969, the Rolling Stones put on a free concert at the Altamont Speedway, east of Oakland. It was the end of a decade. It was supposed to be the West Coast version of Woodstock. Around 300,000 people showed up. Somebody had dumped LSD into gallons of cheap Gallo Red Mountain wine being passed through the crowd in paper cups. It was going to be a peace and love celebration, and the Hells Angels had been brought in to guard the front of the stage. The Hells Angels deny they were hired as full security. Sonny Barger always claimed the Angels were just told to sit on the edge of the stage so nobody jumped on top of it, and they could drink beer until the concert was over. But here is what actually happened, and this comes straight from the KSAN radio broadcast on December 7, 1969, the day after. San Francisco chapter president Pete Nell called in live and said, "They offered us $500 worth of beer to go there and take care of the stage. We took this $500 worth of beer to do it." They got paid in beer, literally. Before the Rolling Stones even took the stage, things were going sideways. Hells Angels were beating concert-goers with sawed-off pool cues. Jefferson Airplane's lead singer, Marty Balin, got knocked unconscious trying to stop an angel from beating up a fan. The Grateful Dead took one look at the atmosphere, refused to play, and drove away. Then Mick Jagger came out. During the song Under My Thumb, an 18-year-old black teenager named Meredith Hunter, wearing a bright lime green suit, pushed forward toward the stage with his 17-year-old white girlfriend, Patty Bredehoft. Earlier that night, Hunter had gone back to Patty's Ford Mustang and retrieved a long-barreled .22 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver from the trunk. He told Patty, "It's just to protect myself. They're getting really bad." What happened next was captured on 16mm film in the documentary Gimme Shelter. Near the front of the stage, Meredith Hunter pulled the gun and raised it into the air. A 21-year-old Hells Angel named Alan Pissarro, wearing a Frisco chapter patch, jumped him from behind, grabbed the gun, and attacked him with a knife. Hunter suffered multiple stab wounds. Other Angels piled in and stomped him while he bled out on the grass. His body was dragged under one of the Grateful Dead's equipment trucks. 3 other people died at Altamont that day, 2 in a hit-and-run in the parking area, 1 drowned in an irrigation canal. And just to complete the mythology, 4 babies were actually born on site during the concert. Alan Pissarro was identified from the Maysles brothers footage, tried in Alameda County, and acquitted by a jury in January 1971 on self-defense grounds. The jury accepted that Meredith Hunter had drawn a loaded revolver first, Passero himself later died under unresolved circumstances in 1985. Sonny Barger's take on Altamont in his autobiography was pure Barger. He said, "All that shit about Altamont being the end of an era was a bunch of intellectual crap. The death of Aquarius, bullshit. Altamont may have been a big catastrophe to the hippies. To me, it was just another Hells Angels event." By the end of the 60s, the Hells Angels were going global. The first international chapter is generally dated to Auckland, New Zealand in 1961. In Britain, the club's emergence intersected with the wider, late 60s counterculture, including some fleeting contact with Beatles guitarist George Harrison, who met a couple of San Francisco Angels in 1968 and invited them to Apple Records on Savile Row. Hamburg followed in the early 1970s, Copenhagen in 1980, Rio de Janeiro in 1984. But it was not chapter expansion that was changing the club. It was money. Methamphetamine money. The best primary source we have on the transition is George Weathern, nicknamed Baby Huey, who was Oakland chapter vice president through the 60s. Weathern left the club around 1972, flipped for federal prosecutors, and entered the Witness Protection Program. In 1978, he published A Wayward Angel, describing how the Oakland chapter's economic base shifted from legitimate blue-collar jobs to methamphetamine manufacturing. Later reporting in Weathern's own account tied his ranch near Ukiah, California, to multiple bodies recovered from wells on the property. During his cooperation, Weathern attempted suicide. That is the level of pressure we are talking about. Sonny Barger got caught up in the drug economy himself. In 1973, Barger was convicted on narcotics and weapons charges and sent to Folsom State Prison. His girlfriend Sharon Grulke, a former Livermore beauty queen, was a co-defendant whose case ended in mistrial. Barger married her while incarcerated at Folsom. In his autobiography, Barger was brutally honest. He wrote, "I snorted so much coke I didn't know what I was doing from one moment to the next. My cocaine mood swings got me into a lot of deep criminal shit and would ultimately land me in Folsom Prison." Barger's sentence was later reduced on appeal, and he was released on November 3, 1977. While Barger was locked up in Folsom, up in Montreal, Canada, a club called the Popeyes Moto Club, under a man named Yves Buteau, patched over to become the first Canadian Hells Angels chapter on December 5, 1977. They were widely considered the most violent club in Quebec. Within weeks, they were at war with the Outlaws. Within 8 years, they would commit a massacre against their own brothers that became a turning point for every biker gang on Earth. We will get to that in a minute. Because first, the United States federal government was about to take its swing at Sonny Barger, and it was going to miss. In the 70s, the Department of Justice rolled out a new weapon against organized crime, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, known as RICO. It had been passed in 1970, specifically designed to dismantle the Italian mafia by prosecuting an entire criminal enterprise rather than individual crimes. By the late 70s, RICO had been devastating to the Cosa Nostra. The FBI decided to apply the same logic to the Hells Angels. On June 13, 1979, approximately 200 federal agents raided Hells Angels properties across the San Francisco Bay Area. A Northern District of California grand jury indicted Sonny Barger and 32 other Hells Angels under RICO. The central charge was that the club itself was a criminal enterprise, engaged in methamphetamine manufacturing to the tune of an alleged $160,000 a day, plus heroin, cocaine, LSD, murder for hire, and illegal firearms. The trial opened on October 4, 1979, in the San Francisco Federal Building. The presiding judge was Samuel Conti, a man so notoriously tough in his sentencing that defense lawyers called him Hanging Sam. The courtroom was fitted with 8-foot plexiglass walls to protect the jury. The prosecution called 194 witnesses. One of the lead assistant United States attorneys on the case was a young man named Robert S. Mueller III. Yes, that Robert Mueller, the future director of the FBI, who later investigated Russian interference in the 2016 election. In 1979, he was just an ambitious prosecutor trying to take down Sonny Barger. The defense had a field day with the government's informant strategy. Court records showed that key informants had been paid substantial sums in cash and granted sweeping immunity. The presiding judge in a related proceeding, William Orrick, publicly called the government's witness payment tactics stupid and clumsy. Informants became a major credibility problem for the government. The defense strategy, led by attorney Richard Mazer, was simple and lethal. His closing argument boiled down to one line: a lot of angels are guilty of a lot of stuff, but they are not club activities. The defense rested on that distinction. On August 7, 1980, after 17 days of deliberation, the first jury hung. The Department of Justice dropped the RICO charges against Barger and retried the remaining defendants. On February 25, 1981, the second jury also hung. Robert Mueller announced there would be no third attempt. Sonny Barger, in his own words, summed up why RICO failed. His exact line was, "There was no proof it was part of club policy. Our victory prevented criminal RICO from achieving what the government prosecutors wanted, which was to hog-tie First Amendment rights." The federal government had built its signature statute to beat the mafia, and the Hells Angels had just figured out how to beat the statute, not by denying the crimes, but by arguing the crimes were not committed on behalf of the club. The template they used, that member crimes are personal rather than organizational, became the legal firewall the Hells Angels have relied on ever since. Every chapter is incorporated as a legally independent entity. The trademark name and the Death's Head logo are owned by the Hells Angels Motorcycle Corporation Incorporated. If a member gets busted making methamphetamine in Phoenix, that is his problem, not the club's. But while the American federal government was losing its biggest shot, up in Quebec, the Hells Angels were about to learn an even harsher lesson about running an international criminal enterprise. They were about to learn it from themselves. On March 24, 1985, in a clubhouse in Sherbrooke, Quebec, something happened that permanently changed the Hells Angels. Members of the Hells Angels North chapter, based in the suburb of Laval, were called to a meeting at the Sherbrooke chapter's clubhouse. What the Laval members did not know was that the meeting was a setup. Leaders from other Canadian chapters had secretly decided to eliminate them. The reason was that the Laval chapter stood accused of using and skimming from the methamphetamine and cocaine supply they were supposed to be distributing. Their members were getting reckless, drawing police heat that was threatening the entire Canadian operation. When the Laval members arrived, they were executed one by one. 5 men died that day. Laurent Viaud, the Laval chapter president, Jean-Pierre Mathieu, Jean-Guy Geoffrion, Guy-Louis Adam, Michel Mayron. Their bodies were wrapped in sleeping bags, weighted with cinder blocks, and thrown into the St. Lawrence River. The event became known as the Lennoxville Massacre, which is actually a misnomer since it happened in Sherbrooke. 3 months later, a fisherman on the St. Lawrence pulled up a decomposing body. Quebec provincial police divers recovered all 5. One Laval Angel, Yves Trudeau, nicknamed Apache, survived only because he was in drug rehab that week. Trudeau figured out what had happened, cut a deal with Canadian police, and became the biggest informant in Hells Angels history. He confessed to 43 murders committed between 1970 and 1985, and under his cooperation deal served only a fraction of the time those crimes would normally imply. His testimony resolved dozens of additional murders and led to multiple Hells Angels convictions in Canada. A Montreal journalist covering the aftermath summed it up. At that moment, the Hells Angels were doing a cleanup to become a real criminal organization. Before that, they were disorganized and unruly. The other Hells Angels wanted to be businessmen. Lennoxville was the moment the Hells Angels stopped being an outlaw motorcycle club with a drug problem and became something closer to an international organized crime syndicate with a motorcycle club on the side. And Sonny Barger's own luck was about to run out. Between 1986 and 1987, an undercover FBI informant named Anthony Tate, nicknamed Taterhead, got close enough to Barger to wire himself up and record private conversations inside Barger's home. In October 1987, Tate floated the idea of bombing the Outlaws Motorcycle Club headquarters in Chicago. On tape, Barger said, "That'll be really nice after that Joliet thing." When Tate pointed out that innocent people might die in the bombing, Barger responded on tape, "That's what they get for hanging around with guys like that." In November 1987, Attorney General Edwin Meese announced that Barger's arrest had averted 5 murders. In October 1988, a federal jury in Louisville, Kentucky, convicted Sonny Barger of conspiracy to violate federal explosives, firearms, and arson laws. His sentence? 4 years. The feds could not beat him with RICO. But they finally got him on a plot the FBI had mostly scripted themselves. Sonny Barger served his 4 years at the Federal Correctional Institution in Phoenix, Arizona. He was released in 1992, went on to write 7 books, act in several films, and lived openly as the most famous outlaw biker in American history until his death from liver cancer in June 2022 at the age of 83. Today, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club is commonly described as having hundreds of chapters across dozens of countries on 6 continents. Official club position: a non-profit corporation of motorcycle enthusiasts. With federally registered trademarks the club has been defending in court for decades. Unofficial position from every law enforcement agency on Earth. One of the big 4 outlaw motorcycle gangs, alongside the Bandidos, the Outlaws, and the Pagans, with documented involvement in international narcotics, racketeering, and organized violence. Here's the thing that still gets me. Most gangs eventually get broken. The Italian Mafia got broken, the Medellin Cartel got broken, the Yakuza got their legs taken out by Japanese legislation. But the Hells Angels? Governments on multiple continents passed specialized anti-gang laws aimed at biker clubs. And those laws mostly did not work against the Angels. Because somewhere between a famously arranged photograph in 1947 and a federal trademark filing, a handful of restless young men and post-war veterans figured out how to build the one thing law enforcement cannot easily raid, arrest, or indict: a brand. If you made it this far, you are not a casual viewer. You are the kind of person who actually cares about the real story behind the myth. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.